Welcome to Lesson 2. You got it. Writing to think. Because researching and writing is more about just taking words from a screen or from a book and putting them on another piece of paper. You got to think to make it work. It's not just about staring at the screen or staring at a book and transferring the words to another paper. Good detectives, good writers, and good researchers think about the clues and the facts that they find. Let me tell you a story. There's a pretty famous professor of astronomy that teaches at Harvard University, Ivy League school, one of the best in the world. Her name is Professor Duckworth, and Professor Duckworth is infamous for assigning a report at the beginning of the semester. She says, at the end of the semester, you're going to write 10 to 15 pages about the moon. But you're not going to use books, you're not going to use videos, you're not going to use the internet. All you're going to do is observe the moon every night for the whole semester. And what happens at first is all of the kids are like, what? How am I going to do that? I don't know about the moon. And the first night, they go outside and they stare up at the moon. And the second night, there might be some staring happening. But by the third or fourth night, all of the people in that class that are staring up at the moon at night start to notice details. They start to say, hey, the moon was a different shape last night. Or, hey, the moon has moved across the sky. Or, I never noticed that crater before. So, a good researcher, a good student, and a good writer thinks about the facts that they're reading about or that they're observing about, in this case. Let me give you an example. So, in these writing lessons, I've talked a lot about using the Wild West or the Oregon Trail as an example. So I'm going to continue with that example. My topic is the Oregon Trail. I will have 5 subtopics for the interest of space, though I only have 2 up here. My first subtopic is who traveled along the Oregon Trail, and my second subtopic is why. Why were people traveling along the Oregon Trail? So this is how historians think. This is how scientists think, and this is how writers and researchers think too. Let me show you. I'm going to read you a passage, and we'll trace the events that we've read about on a map. And we'll collect clues to help us think about the facts that we're learning about, okay? So here are the facts. The settlers traveled from what is now Missouri toward the west in covered wagons. It was a long, more than 2,000-mile trip. Many of them traveled through what is now Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, and Washington before they stopped. They had to cross many rivers, like the Platte River, and so on and so forth. So, if we were to look at this on a map, you would be tracing this route with your finger, going across the state of Idaho, Missouri. You'd run into some rivers and some mountains along the way. But while you're looking that information, it's important that you start to think to yourself. So, for example, who? Well, I don't know who yet, but I know that they traveled west. I just read that in the passage, and now I'm thinking to myself, okay, I know that they're traveling west through a bunch of states. The passage said over 2,000 miles. So, and most people traveled in families. So what I'm thinking to myself is, that must have been really difficult traveling by wagon, which is almost as slow as on foot, with my family for 2,000 miles. I don't know about you guys, but that was my first thought. The other thing I thought about was the passage said they crossed the Platte Rivers, the Mississippi River, and other rivers. And I started to think, gosh, that's treacherous. I'm going to change this who to where or how. Because this subtopic, I can do a who over here. That'll be my third subtopic. But what the research that I'm finding now really matches another subtopic. So I know that people traveled west. I just read that. And then I thought to myself, this is my own thought right here. It must have been really hard traveling 2,000 miles, sometimes more, with your family. And this is my thought here. It must have been treacherous crossing the river. In fact, that makes me wonder, did anyone lose anything in the river? Like animals, or maybe something fell off the wagon into the river that they couldn't go swim and get? So right here, I've got one quote, one piece of information I read to you, which was that people traveled the West through many states and encountered rivers. But look at all of these thoughts that I have written down because I was able to think through this fact. So while you're doing your research, take it slow. Write down a fact, and then write down a few things that you're thinking or inferring about the fact. There are some stems that'll be helpful that you can use for this. Let me write these stems here. And it would be helpful if you wrote these down somewhere as well. They're going to be very similar to our thinking strategy stems. So let's say you read a fact and you start your next thought, well, this makes me think. In this case, maybe this makes you think of a time when you went camping and you had to bring all of your belongings across a creek, and you're empathizing with the Oregon Trail travelers, how difficult that was. Another stem you could use is, I'm realizing. Before I started my research on the Oregon Trail, I had no idea how treacherous and deadly it could be. Maybe after you find out a few facts, you realize something. Some of you are doing research on different games. I realize this game is a lot older than I thought. Or I realize this game could be expensive because it requires a lot of equipment. So think about some things that are coming to you that you're realizing as you research. Some other stems are, I wonder if. I used that one just a second ago when I said, I wonder if the people crossing rivers on the Oregon Trail dropped things into rivers often. One of my favorite phrases, for example. You might be able to come up with an example in relation to the research that you're writing. Could it be that maybe a question comes to you as you're doing your research? So these are some good stems to use. And again, you should be writing at least one of your own thoughts about each new fact that you write down. So after you find a new fact, take a second to stop and think before you write. Write down your fact and then think. What does this make me think of? Are you realizing anything? Are you wondering anything? Do you have any examples of this? Do you have any new questions that came about because of what you're learning? After this lesson, after you finish your research and do your right to think stems next to your new facts, you'll need to check in with me before you can begin your rough draft.